Councilmember Jose Huizar. This is the Energy and Environment Committee. I've been joined by my colleagues, Councilmember Labange, Zine, and Koretz. And happy birthday, Mr. Koretz.
Thank
All
you.
right. Colleagues, we could go through the agenda. And I was going to request that items 6, 7, and 8 be on consent unless somebody wants to hear those, either of those.
Which one?
6, 7, and 8 consent.
I got a question. I just have one question on 7.
On 7, okay.
I got a question on 6.
Okay, so we'll put item number...
Question on 6, real quick one.
Okay. We have item number 8 on consent without objection, so we'll order that
Okay.
forthwith. Is that possible in committee?
Order it, man, order it.
Okay, forthwith.
Forthwith.
Hi, Mr. Stein.
Hey, Tommy.
I think items number 6 and 7 may be quick, so why don't we take those items up first? Item number 6, please.
Certainly. Item number 6, Public Works Report relative to agreements and amendments to secure award grants for the water relief tree planting project. We have staff from the Bureau of Sanitation.
Questions, comments on this? Or
The one question, we pass motions for trees, and I'm a tree guy, I plant trees. Trees keep growing, and we're not trimming them. Trees now are covering a tri-light at several locations. If you go to Lafayette Park, right at Wilshire Boulevard, the branches are now covering the tri-light, the signal. So the concern I wanted to raise, and I don't know if a city attorney's here or someone, to make sure on our trees that we do trimming near traffic lights, safety lights, signs, and what other. I want to make a point of that. Are you going to handle that?
Yeah.
So that's a friendly amendment to this, to make sure, because we plant a lot of trees. How many trees did the mayor get to now? How many, a million what?
Well, about 400,000.
400,000,
That's
good.
part of the million trees.
I told him he could count the trees in the river, and he'd get a lot if he wanted to, but he just smiled at me. So some of the tree program I'm very supportive of, but we got to maintain trees. So I just wanted to make a point, Mr. Huizar and colleagues. So if you make a note that we do order the Board of Public Works to do tree trimming near traffic signals and safety signs, because people are not, we've stopped trimming trees, yet they keep growing. And I know I'm not your thing,
Right.
but you're related to it because you're a tree person.
All right,
So, good.
take that note. Thank you, Mr.
Note that, will you? A friendly amendment.
Mr. Zine.
Okay, the project calls for 3,000 trees, and the issue is, does this relate to the Million Tree Program, or is this separate, or is this coordinated with that?
Hi, my name is Melinda Bartlett, and I'm with Regulatory Affairs Division, Bureau of Sanitation. This is a tree grant that was awarded in 2009 as part of the Metro Call for Projects.
Right.
And it is independent of the million trees, although any trees that are planted are counted towards the million trees at this point.
Okay, and this may tag on to Councilmember Labange's question. Funding cover maintenance costs of those trees, or is maintenance all separate?
The initial maintenance is provided by the homeowners. Before we plant a tree, a resident or a business owner has to agree to care for that sapling as it grows up.
Including the water.
They have to water it. That's the main concern with keeping it alive as a baby. Bureau of Street Services has their own tree trimming programs with whatever funding they have for each year, and they would be better suited to speak to this in terms of how much maintenance they can get done.
Because
if we don't plant trees now, as the older ones come down, you'll have a gap in your tree canopy as a whole.
what we get is a lot of complaints about them not being maintained or trimmed. That's one of the continuing problems that we get. We're not trimming the trees.
Right.
So planting them is one issue, but then maintenance is another issue that should be addressed. And then the other question is DOT providing the match, and the
Correct.
grant's administered by sanitation. So how do you get DOT to do the match with sanitation?
They're going to send the match money by this council authority to Public Works Environmental Trust Fund, and we will use that match throughout the 2-year program.
So sanitation and DOT are working together on this.
They are. This was through the MTA call for projects, and
And
in
that's the DOT
2009
part.
they guaranteed the hard cash match that was required.
And then it was approved, it went from '09 to '12, and now we're going to implement.
Correct. They roll, when they program those MTA call for projects, they're over 4, 6, 8 years.
Right.
And this is our time.
Okay, great, thank you, that's all I had.
Mr. Koretz, any questions on this item? No? Okay, so we'll move that item without objection.
Mr. Chair, would you like to accept the friendly amendment from?
Yes, is that going to pose any problems on your implementation, Mr.
We
Bodge?
can't pay for tree trimming, but I'm happy.
Happy to carry the
continue.
word. They got to plant a tree, we got to trim those. Because what's going to happen, we're going to get whacked when there's an accident and we haven't trimmed a tree. So I want to just, you're with the Board of Public Works?
I'm with Public Works, but I
Right,
can
just I
ask
want you to make sure to
Bureau of
notify.
Services to-
Just tell the Board of Public Works.
The request.
The request.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next item.
Item number 7, DEP report relative to execution of an agreement with Kern River Gas Transmission Company. We have staff from the Department of Water and Power.
Mr. Koretz, I believe you have a question on this?
Yeah, just one question. I just want to clarify. We're agreeing to extend this agreement term to September 2016, and then the next one to 2018, correct? What do we do after that? What's the plan?
It depends on the IRP, how much gas we are forecasted to use. We're going to use, the idea of getting firm transportation on Kern River is to match what our expected needs are. So we want to have firm capacity to bring gas into the SoCal system, and we have firm capacity in the SoCal system to bring it to our power plant. So it all depends on forecasts, how we're doing on renewables, et cetera. But we have the right of first refusal, so that capacity will be there. If we want it, we can roll it over. And often capacity comes up that we can buy in addition to what we already have rights to. And if we really need it, Kern River will be happy to expand their pipeline.
So this doesn't commit us indefinitely to the gas usage. It just gives us the option of taking advantage of it.
No, we have complete flexibility. We can get we can roll over this contract or not, or do whatever we want.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a quick question. Our success in the future to provide energy is having the right blend. And the blend could be a variety of issues. We'll never have we'll never all be all solar or all gas. We're moving off coal, correct?
Sounds good to me. The IRP people will fill you in on the details, but you're correct.
Right, that's what we want to blend. So, okay, good. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. We could go to item number 1 now, please.
Okay. Recommend approval on number 7?
Yes, move
Unanimous?
Okay.
unanimous approval.
Number 1, verbal presentation by the South Coast Air Quality Management District relative to arsenic emissions from the Exide Battery Recycling Facility.
Thank you very much, and I want to first thank the AQMD for coming out to provide a report on this item. And as soon as I heard about the situation, I wanted to schedule a hearing in the city of Los Angeles so that we could be on top of this issue and address it accordingly. And first, let me express my extreme concern about the recent findings of high levels of arsenic and cancer risks associated with operations at Exide Technologies, a firm that is in the city of Vernon. I represent Boyle Heights. I grew up in Boyle Heights. I still live in Boyle Heights. And as a father who is raising 4 children there, I think I joined all residents of Boyle Heights to express our concern, outrage about seeing these types of air pollution in the community. And we want to make sure that these exposure levels be addressed immediately by Exide. We want to make sure that we move forward and express to Exide that we want this done at all costs. I don't think any life has a price to it. Exide is adding toxic air pollution to Boyle Heights in an area which already has unacceptable levels of air pollution. I want to go on record to ask Exide through the AQMD as we move forward and have the City of LA express that we would hope that the cleanest available pollution control technology in the industry is implemented and that we should do this immediately. I know that the City of LA does not have direct jurisdiction, but hopefully working with AQMD and later on in this meeting, I will ask our city attorney and our appropriate departments to see if there is any action the city of Los Angeles can take, legal or otherwise. But for right now, I want to thank the AQMD for coming to our committee, letting us know what the situation is, and see what action, if any, the city of Los Angeles can take as we move forward. So with that, unless there's any questions or comments from our committee members, I would turn it over to AQMD and start our presentation. Mr. Zine, did you?
A couple questions. Are we coordinating with Boyle Heights for City of LA, but Maywood and Huntington Park, are we coordinating with them, so this affects obviously not just LA, Boyle Heights?
The answer is yes. We are coordinating with all affected cities in order to make sure they're first of all aware of this, and also to keep them updated on the actions being taken to reduce the risk and emissions from this facility.
And is anyone here from Exide?
Anyone here from Exide? And part of the action plan I have in mind, Mr. Zine, is to direct our city attorney and staff to come back with a plan of action as to what we can do, and to invite Exide as well at our next hearing on this matter. And I'm hoping to see if we could do that within 30 days. So we will give that direction at the end of the meeting, at the end of this item, to see if that's possible, and reach out to Exide in the process to see what their response may be.
Excellent. And this has been going on for how long?
The emissions from the Exide has been, the facility has been there since 1920s. And
Why don't we do this? Why don't we,
just go.
you have a prepared presentation, I would
I have
assume. So if you could just do your presentation, and within that, if the questions are not answered,
Okay,
then we'll
okay.
go to questions. Yeah,
I
thank you.
appreciate it. Good afternoon, Councilmember Huizar and other members of the committee. My name is Mohsen Nazemi. I'm Deputy Executive Officer for South Coast Air Quality Management District, which has jurisdiction over the four-county region. Unfortunately, have the highest pollution in the nation, and almost half of the state's population lives in this four-county region of Orange and non-desert portions of Los Angeles, San Bernardino, Riverside County. Exide, as indicated, has operated this facility since 10 years ago when they took over the ownership, but the facility has been at this location southeast of Los Angeles for since the mid-1920s. Exide is one of the only two lead-acid battery recycling facilities west of the Rockies, and they process probably anywhere from 20 to 40,000 lead-acid batteries a day and produce a refined material of about 340 tons per day of lead. As part of their operation, obviously lead has been a major concern with this type of operation, and because of the emissions from Exide, we have established and required under our existing rules a ambient monitoring network around the facility to measure lead emissions from both stacks and fugitive lead emissions. And in 2008, because of the emissions of lead from this facility, actually the County of Los Angeles was declared by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as non-attainment for lead after decades of being in attainment. So our agency took a very aggressive approach to addressing the lead emissions from this facility. We adopted one of the most stringent rules nationwide dealing with lead. For example, the federal EPA standard for lead is a certain level, 0.15 microgram per cubic meter on a 90-day average. Our rule actually required the same level, but on a 30-day average. So it went more stringent than the federal standard even for lead. And the federal standard was reduced from 1.5 to 0.15 a few years ago. So they actually recognized lead as being a very toxic metal. So the reason I'm here today, as for Councilmember Huizar's request, is to give you an update of the arsenic emissions, which is different than lead. The lead emissions has actually been reduced to the levels that meets the 0.15, the lowest standards anywhere in the nation from this facility. However, arsenic is a different metal, and based on the series, after we realized that there was lead emissions that caused the non-attainment status, we actually took a very aggressive approach, required every stack at this facility to be tested for not just lead, but for multiple pollutants. including arsenic. And as part of that aggressive approach, we realized that there is arsenic emissions also that is causing health effects and health impact to the community surrounding this facility. And in order to answer your quick question relative to how long has this been going on, we have, since 2010, we have evidence that there is arsenic emissions. Whether or not that has been there before, if you ask my professional opinion, the answer is probably yes, it has been there before. It's just that we were able to quantify it clearly in 2010 and required Exide to do a risk assessment to address the emissions. The first test that I actually did on arsenic, there was some problems with the equipment that wasn't operating properly, so Exide came back and did a retest, and they measured lower arsenic levels. But for the purposes of the risk assessment, we didn't just say, okay, well, they'll use the lower numbers. We want to make sure that the public health is protected, and even if the emissions of arsenic was going out for a short period of time, we don't know that, but because one test showed a higher number, we wanted them to use both numbers. The results that was presented as part of our news press release and is in the package that I handed out to you shows that a wide area is being impacted from arsenic emissions. And in fact, to answer your question, our agency has made this our highest priority in terms of dealing with toxic emissions and requiring Exide to take immediate actions to address the emissions. We called the CEO of the company immediately to fly down here and meet with us, and he committed that he will actually take any immediate actions necessary. We processed a permit to modify their equipment in less than a week. We issued them a permit, and they've installed some equipment that is not, I would say it's significantly reducing the emissions, but from our point of view, it's not a final permanent fix. We want them to do more. But they have now put in a device that is called an automatic door that will seal the furnace, that in order to charge this furnace, they had to drop acid batteries through a hopper into the furnace. And when they were doing that, there was some emissions that was coming back up through that hopper. So what we've required them to do, and they've already installed it earlier this week, they've put in an automatic door that it would only open during the charging process, and the remainder of the time remains closed. And we want them to install additional controls to make sure that the emissions that are within that building are also brought under control. Our process that we are going through right now is that now that we have this risk evaluation results, we are going to hold a series of public meetings and notify the communities of Boyle Heights, Maywood, Huntington Park, and other areas that are impacted about the risk levels. And under our rules, they're required to reduce this risk to levels below 25 in a million, and we are expediting the time frame. They typically have 6 months to submit a plan and 3 years to reduce the risk. Well, we're requiring them to do this in a much faster pace than, as like I mentioned, we just issued them a permit in a week to get the controls added, and then we're requiring them to do additional measures to reduce the risk. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
So, question number one, so to what is the risk? We talk about contamination, but to put it in layperson's terms, and what exactly is the risk? It's arsenic that may cause cancer.
Arsenic has cancer and non-cancer health effects. The risk from arsenic is measured in chances of contracting cancer. When you look at where the highest risk is, it's actually very close to the facility in not the residential area, but an industrial area where the other commercial and industrial facilities are. That risk at the highest level is 156 in a million. And in a nutshell, what that means doesn't mean that 156 people will contract cancer, but it is just a probability that if somebody is working at a building directly next to Exide and works there 40 years, 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, and exposed to that level of arsenic exposure has a chance of contracting cancer 156 in a million. Now, as you all know, the rate of cancer based on studies done is 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 in all individuals in the United States. But I don't want to diminish this risk. I mean, this is from air pollution, and it is a high risk, and we need to deal with it. But as you move away from the facility, the risk significantly drops. And by the time you get to the residential area, the risk is in a 22 in a million. So it does significantly drop as you move away from the facility.
And how does this risk compare to other areas or other normal areas? I mean, is this one of the highest contaminated areas for arsenic in the area, in the region?
I can't say exactly for arsenic, but I can tell you about the risk. When we did we are doing a new study on air toxics throughout the basin, but our most recent study, which was done under MATES 3, we measured risks from air pollution ranging anywhere from 1,000 to 1,600 in a million. Majority of that risk, though, is due to mobile sources, in particular diesel particulate emissions coming from trucks, trains, and ships. However, when you ask me if this is the highest risk from arsenic, I can't answer that from the top of my head, but I would guess that this is a pretty high arsenic levels compared to the other facilities.
And what's a normal level? 1 in how many? I mean, you gave us the example of 156 in a million. What's a normal?
Unfortunately, there's no normal, but the average risk, like I said, that exists in our region is around 12 to 1,400 in a million, which is from all other sources, not just from one facility.
Gotcha.
But the risks from one facility, if it's over 10 in a million, under our rules, we require the facility to notify the public about that risk, and if it's over 25 in a million, they have to reduce the risk through this process.
And this is an area that has been fighting battles against air pollution on several fronts. I mean, so the problem we face in this part of Los Angeles is a cumulative effect of yet another source of pollution that adds to an already alarming quality of air in the region. So it adds to it and adds to it pretty significantly. Now, it will affect about 110,000 people. Is that correct? Is that the radius you've come up with?
That is absolutely correct, and that is, just so that everybody knows, that's the area where the risk is greater than 10 in a million. So not 110,000 people are exposed to 156 in a million, but within that area, and there's a couple of maps in the handout that I handed out. And
do you come across these types of risks often, to have that many people?
We do not, from a stationary source, we do not get these types
fairly
of
rare,
risks
correct?
Very often, although I think what is important about this facility in particular and the risk is that how widely it spreads out. We do have, even a dry cleaner can have a risk of above 25 in a million, but when you look at a facility like a dry cleaner, the only people that may be exposed to it would be the people who live next door or work next door. When you look at this facility, you see that large isoplet that spreads out the risk, so it is exposing a much larger number of people. The 10 or 100 or 25 in a million is the maximum risk to any individual.
There's another company nearby that produces large batteries, another large recycling facility in the region, and Cometco. It installed new equipment, and it was able to reduce its pollution by 90-95%. Is that accurate?
That's correct, and Exide has also been able to reduce its lead emissions by those 90+% levels. But again, this was a different type of a metal that wasn't anticipated to be released at these levels.
Okay. And AQMD went through a rulemaking for battery recycling in 2010. Did that rulemaking use what's called the best available control technology, correct?
Correct. That rulemaking was to ensure that lead-acid battery recycling plants, which we only have two, as you mentioned, Cometco and Exide.
Both companies achieve the same levels?
They both meet the standards in the rule. Cometco has argued that they can meet lower standards compared to Exide, but they both meet the standards that are in the rule.
Okay. But are both using the same type of technology or different types of technology?
In terms of the technology they use for recovering the lead, it's pretty close, similar type of technology. In terms of the type of air pollution control equipment, Cometco uses what's called a wet electrostatic precipitator, or WESP, which means that all of the exhaust from every stack and every emission source from that facility goes through first a wet control system called a wet scrubber, and then through a dry control system. For Exide, they do have the wet and the dry, but not every stack from this facility goes through both processes, and that's why there are arsenic emissions that were not captured through the wet scrubbing system at this facility, and we're working with Exide to make sure that all of their emissions are controlled in that manner.
Thank you. And my final question for now, are you aware of whether or not all of Exide's permits are up to date?
In fact, yes, I just checked with my staff, and all their permits are up to date, and presently they're in compliance with Rule 1421.1, which is our lead rule. And this process that we're walking through here is not a process that finds a facility out of compliance, but it is, like I said, our highest priority to make sure that the risk is reduced to levels that are below thresholds that we've established.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments? Mr. Zine?
The arsenic and lead, anything else that is of trouble for the community? Any other substance?
Up until a few years ago, the lead was the driving metal for the toxic risk. Right now it's arsenic, but the lead recovery process, acid batteries have all kinds of metals in them. And so there are other metals, but they're not released at levels that should be of any concern. These are the two compounds that we've seen as the highest risk drivers.
But there are other metals, but they're not of a risk factor.
They're not contributing to the risk levels.
Okay. And how many employees do they have at that site?
I'm going to guess over 200, but I don't recall right off the top of my head.
And has there been any analysis of how many of those individuals have been stricken with cancer? Any associated illness?
That type of analysis is not done by our agency, but I'm sure they're required to do lead tests for employees and measure lead levels in their...
If we can get
one
that...
thing you need to understand also that I didn't mention is that the employees that work in certain areas of this facility, they actually are required under OSHA standards to be what we call suited, which means they wear
Protective
coveralls and protective and filtration system for breathing purposes. So they may not be exposed to the same level of emissions once you step outside the facility.
So what I think we need to also add to this is the incidents where employees have been affected with any kind of cancer-associated illness. And if we can get that from OSHA, not the names of the individuals, under HIPAA that's restricted, protected, but if they got 200 employees and none of them have had any incidents, or 200 employees and whatever number, that all plays into this equation of how serious this factor is, not only for the community, but for the employees that work there. Maybe some of those employees live in the community, so when they leave work, while they take off the protective, then they're going to be exposed again.
Yeah, clearly worker exposure should be of a concern too. It's just that our agency does not have the authority to regulate that.
I understand it. Do you have access, or do we then request, Mr. Chair, that we get that information from OSHA or
We'll make
from
it
some other
part
source?
of our CLA report that we ask for at the end of this item.
So we can make sure we cover the employees who are obviously exposed. You say that there are 20 to 40,000 batteries processed a day?
Correct.
Is this 5 days a week? 6 days a week?
7 days a week,
There's 24-hour plant or
4-hour plant.
24-hour plant, 7 days a week, 20 to 40,000 batteries processed. a
Right,
day.
they're collecting batteries anywhere from Alaska to Mexico, west of the Rockies, and they're all brought to this region, and these two plants are the only two plants that are west of the Rockies that recycle lead-acid batteries.
So they have a massive load that they have to process and a 24-hour day operation, 7 days a week. So the incidents are obviously critical for the community. Mr. Chair, you mentioned here 180 days. Do we have an opportunity to maybe reduce that time frame to something, since it's a hazardous situation, a health hazard, and to continue the exposure, can we reduce that to a lower level?
Well, yes, we hope to get a report back from the CLA and the City Attorney's Office in 30 days.
Okay.
So that we could know what our plan of action is and take an official City of Los Angeles position. Obviously, this is not our jurisdiction, but we have legal recourse. We have, a announcement we can make as a city as to what our official position is, and that may take its course in any administrative matter before the AQMD or other agency.
Is the
And
county,
Councilmember Zine, if I may add, that's like the maximum amount of time allowed to do anything. But as I mentioned earlier, we have made this our highest priority, and Exide has, at least so far, been very cooperative, and they are taking immediate actions. As I said, we've issued them a permit, and they've already put in some mechanism to reduce the emissions, and we fully intend to implement emission reductions much faster than what the maximum allowed times are.
and is the county board of supervisors involved in this at all?
We've notified,
Your name, Mr. Alatorre?
yes, we contacted Supervisor Molina's office. They're aware of it. We're going to be briefing her office on the 11th, next week. So yes, they are
And
aware.
what about the state representatives?
Today, we've already spoke with De Leon, Speaker Perez's office, all the elected.
So everybody's on board?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's all I have.
Mr. LeBon?
Just a couple questions there. I hike every day in Griffith Park, and since the Mayor Villaraigosa's initiative and Janice Hahn's work, and now the councilman of the district, Mr. Buscaino, there is a difference in the air in the south, what I would call east part of Los Angeles County, in the harbor. As you mentioned, the harbor, the rail yards, other factors, the combination of freeways there. You're AQMD. And I know Heal the Bay does a thing where they rate storm drains, how they rate them. Do you rate regions of the county as far as above and below what your goals are?
Our goal is to make all areas within this four-county region to meet the healthful air standards. So we don't have a different standard for different regions, but as you mentioned, depending on where the concentration of these emission sources are, typically closer to the ports, there are higher levels of emissions that those areas.
But you're greeting the ports. You're familiar with the mayor's program?
Yes.
Okay, and then like the rail yards, you got two big rail yards right next to Vernon. The Hobart Yard, and I don't know what the other yard's called. But how are they, do you have any data from the last 40 years?
Our agency only regulates stationary sources. We've been very aggressive trying to regulate the rail yards and railroads, and we've taken it all the way to the Supreme Court, and we've lost on one case. So our attempts are to work with these sources.
I like the railroad. I mean, they're important. That's what founded this country. You know what upset Jesse James? You know what upset Jesse James?
What?
They took his land, and it upset Jesse's mother. That's what started Jesse James on what Jesse James did. So that's a little American history. The
A
railroad.
little history trivia here.
But also, too, Mike McKelvey, who was a great public works secretary, told me long ago you never could beat the railroads, because if they do it for our town, there's 1,000 towns between here and Topeka. But I think you see a movement. When you mention the railroads, they're advertising on national television now about greening their lines and the energy use, and I don't know if anyone here has that experience of what a train could pull for that. So I think we should look for these cooperative spirits that we can, because I think just from empirical, I don't know if anybody lives down in the San Pedro in this room at all, but Long Beach, there has been a change since the ports have demanded change. You know, Dr. Natz, Janice Hahn, Mr. Villaraigosa, and others, Joe Buscaino, the new councilman. So I see a change. As someone who grew up here, Dennis, you grew up here. And Paul, we remember as kids playing, you would just breathe real tough, but it is not as bad, but it's still not to the point where we want it. So I just want to hear from you.
You're absolutely right, and I didn't want to take too much of your time, but our air is cleanest than ever been. You know, in the
Right.
last 4 decades, we have come a long way. The air has been cleaned significantly. Unfortunately, we still have the worst air quality in the nation. And
But I think no one has a city and a coastline with the mountains that lets that inversion in the heat from the desert. I mean, there's a practicality that we can't beat unless the Santa Anas comes in. If you got Santa Anas, you got fires. So there's all these challenges here. So I think what you're doing is right, Mr. Weezer. We want to help you any way possible, because the one thing, there may be borders between cities, but pollution knows no borders, and it goes. So to make sure that we keep the health as great as possible. So thank you for your work. How's the pollution in Diamond Bar?
Diamond Bar is part of LA County, and it does have pollution because it's the intersection of 2 major freeways.
But there also the mountains, it blows that way.
There's a
That's
channel
where-
that
yeah,
flows
right.
there through the Diamond Bar.
much.
Mr. Koretz?
Are there any other facilities in the area that do the same thing and follow better practices and don't threaten the health and well-being of neighboring individuals that can be used as an example of how to operate?
As I indicated, Council Member, there are only two facilities west of the Rockies that recycle lead-acid battery. One is Exide, the other one is Cometco in the City of Industry. And Cometco has installed some more robust air pollution control system than Exide has, which takes the emissions from all sources within the facility and runs them through a little bit more sophisticated air pollution control system. But their technology for melting the batteries and recovering the lead is pretty much the same.
So is there any reason why we couldn't require the Exide facility to come up to the exact same standards that the other is operating under?
Well, we established the same standards for both facilities relative to lead, and they both are meeting that standard today. The question is, should there be additional measures for control of other toxic chemicals such as arsenic? And after we bring Exide back into normal operations where it can meet the same risk levels that we have in our rules, we're going to take another look at our rules and see if there's anything more we need to do with that. Like I said, there's only two facilities, and if you can make sure that their emissions are reduced, we don't need to go back and adopt more rules as long as they can meet those standards.
So how difficult will it be to get Exide to meet the same standards that the other facility is meeting in terms of arsenic?
It's not going to be a difficult process. It's just going to take some time to get them there, and the time it takes is for them to design the controls and install them. We're going to do everything we can to expedite the permitting process, and even though, as you heard, there's 180 days window allowed under our rules to submit a risk reduction plan, and a full 3 years from the date the plan is submitted to reduce the risk. We're intending to take a much more aggressive approach and require them to do this within months, not years. And therefore, it's just a matter of time to design and install the equipment.
So they're aware of the problem. Are they already working on it, or are they going to wait until this is forced upon them by AQMD and kind of go kicking and screaming?
They are actively working on it. As I indicated, they applied for a permit to modify their equipment, and we issued the permit in a week turnaround. They've already installed a door that reduces the fugitive emissions that was causing the increase in risk. But what we want is something more long-term and more robust than what they have done. And they've agreed to do that. They have not said, yeah, we're not going to do it, or we're going to drag our feet and use the allowed time. So we hope that, you ask Councilmember Huizar for a 30-day report back. I'm hoping in 30 days we can give you a much, much more important report.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you very much for your presentation. I think given well, let me ask you this, one final question. Exide, how have they been as an actor? I mean, would you think that they just been negligent in what they've been doing? Have they been abusing their ability to provide their services, or is it just something that they haven't been willing to invest money when it's available, or what do you think happened here? How do we get to this point?
Well, we think Exide, as I mentioned, they've undergone some ownership changes. There's been some bankruptcies in the previous owners. When we began to focus strictly on the lead, we noticed that Exide has not been investing enough in air pollution control system at this facility. And so we actually went ahead and adopted a very stringent rule and regulation to force them to do that. Obviously, their interest should be to protect the employees, as you indicated, Councilmember Zine, as well as the public that lives around that facility. And they have expressed a high level of interest to do that. It's just that it took a while to get them to go in on this right track and get the controls put in. And now they've indicated that they're more than willing to spend whatever it takes to make sure the arsenic emissions are reduced. As I mentioned, lead emission has been brought under control. When we used to have, there's a graph in your handout that you can look at it, that there used to be significant higher levels of lead, and now that you look at it, it's dropped below 0.15. So they have been cooperative, and they have been installing what it takes to control lead. It's just that this is a new thing that has popped on us, and they're trying to address it quickly.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I hope through these discussions that we are able to take decisive, strong, and quick action, and that's the hope, given the severe exposure that this creates for the surrounding communities and residents of the city of Los Angeles. I'm going to request that the city attorney and the CLA give us a report in 30 days so that we could come up with language and options as to what action the city of Los Angeles can take as its official stand, so that Exide can provide the cleanest technology, regardless of price, available to them to address this atrocity in our communities. And furthermore, I'd also ask that we go on the record in that report of CLA could also make mention that 3 years, as Mr. Zine mentioned, is too long to wait. We hope to see how quickly they could expedite that. And they will come up with a plan within 6 months, but they have up to 3 years to implement whatever corrective changes. I know the AQMD here has said they are hoping and wishing to have quick response as well. We're hoping that our official stance will take that into consideration as well. And my final point, I understand we have somebody here from the city attorney's office. So if you want to just add any final thoughts, and anybody from the CLA that wishes to, anybody from the CLA here as we, okay, so if you two can provide that report in 30 days, and if the city attorney would like to add anything to that.
Good afternoon, Deputy City Attorney John Carvalho. I represent Bureau of Sanitation, General Counsel. I confirm with Bureau of Sanitation that their collection centers that are operating within the city, both the BOS sites that people can drop off their batteries, and the safe centers where we have a contractor, a vendor that collects the batteries and disposes of the batteries. Exide's not being used for the disposal. It's the other company that was mentioned by AQMD. So I've confirmed that with BOS.
Okay, great, thank you. That was a question we had. And so secondly, we'll look forward to the joint report from CLA and the City Attorney's Office that would cover any course of action we could take, come up with a official position for the City of Los Angeles given the comments by the committee members, and also any legal or non-legal action that we may take.
Certainly. We'll work with members of the city family to put a position together, as well as report back on those issues that I mentioned.
In 30 days. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we'll continue this item for 30 days, and thank you to both members of AQMD for coming here today. Thank you. Next item, please.
Number 2, verbal presentation by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power relative to the status of DWP's Integrated Resources Plan. And the request is to take this item up as well with item number 3, implementation report.
Yes.
DWP and RPA report relative to implementation of recommendations of the independent third-party review.
We could take items 2 and 3 together. Thank you. Good, yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Webster. I'm Assistant Director of our Power System Planning and Development. And what I'd like to do today is give you a very high-level overview of an Integrated Resource Plan for 2012. We've been before this committee in the past for 2010. We did an update in 2011. And so what you're going to hear today is some refinements. We have fine-tuned our assumption sets. We have more clarity. And we have some better modeling that we've done as far as the costs. And so we're just going to highlight some of those things today. Now, it took LADWP 100 years to build the current system. And in the next 15 years, we will be replacing 70% of our system. And we're going to do so by maintaining reliability. So this Integrated Resource Plan outlines those activities. And they can really be summarized in 5 ways. It's going to be through energy efficiency, renewable energy, rebuilding our coastal plants to get off ocean water cooling and integrate renewables, eliminate coal, and number 5 is to invest in our power reliability for the coming years. So those are the 5 things that we're doing to transform the system, and we have had some major accomplishments. We're maintaining 20%. We're on a growth track to get to 25% by 2016. We have increased our energy efficiency levels, and you'll see that here today. One thing I wanted to point out is that we reached our 100th megawatt of the Solar Incentive Program, and that's a significant accomplishment to hit that level. Now, it hasn't been built yet. We've basically processed that. It's being built. But very soon, we will have 100 megawatts of our Solar Incentive Program on homeowners and commercial rooftops in the city of Los Angeles. We've also launched a portion of our 150 megawatts of local renewable energy. That was 100 megawatts of a set price feed-in tariff program to meet the state requirements. We'll hear more about an additional 50 megawatts in the next couple of weeks. And we built and owned 2 of the largest municipal-owned solar projects in the country, the Adelanto Solar Farm as well as the Pine Tree Solar Farm, which is now operational. And we've reduced our emission levels of CO2 21% below 1990 levels. And so what we did differently this time is that in the Integrated Resource Plan, instead of having a public workshop after we came up with results and presented those results, we actually brought stakeholders in at the very earliest stages. So we had an environmental stakeholder workshop so that they could have input into how we design the cases and how we design moving forward in our analysis and our assumption sets. We met with large commercial accounts in the same manner. We brought business community in, and we brought neighborhood councils in at the very beginning of the process. And they worked with us through the process until the point where we could have a more formal public workshop. And that was one of the significant changes we made. Now, I like this cover. This cover is actually our Pine Tree Solar Farm right next to the wind facility. So we took a wind project that we own and operate, and we were able to figure out how to get solar integrated with that so we have a combined project that better use the transmission and better use the site. And so that's the picture that you see on that page.
Kern County?
This is in Kern County, just outside of Mojave. So there were 4 cases of coal that we analyzed. Early coal divestiture of Navajo and IPP, compliant divestiture of Navajo and IPP, so it would be 2019 for Navajo and 2027 for IPP. But then we had multiple energy efficiency cases and distributed generation. And that formed 8 different cases and various permutations around those various cases. And so when you look at the results, first is renewables. What did we do differently on renewables? And so I just want to point out a couple of things on this slide. Is what you see is a more balanced renewable portfolio moving forward. Right now we're very heavily wind, small hydro, and biogas. And for a balanced portfolio, and Commissioner Lamonge, I think you brought that up, it's important from a risk management perspective to do that. And so you'll see a growth in solar, and you've seen some of the solar contracts come through council, and a growth there. And then you see growth in geothermal. Because geothermal provides baseload power for us. We don't have to spend as much money integrating that into the system. You'll see very little growth in wind. There may be some wind here or there, but this is the main growth areas. And then biogas right now, you'll see that declining because as our biogas, pipeline quality biogas drops off, we're hoping to replace that with other types of renewables. Now, as California starts to look at California biogas, we may be able to see an increase in this as we get landfills to the point where they can provide pipeline quality biogas to our power plants. But that's going to be for a future time. And then you'll see energy efficiency savings here. And so that's our renewables portfolio moving forward. And then we talked about eliminating ocean water cooling. And we do that through repowering our Scattergood, our Haynes, our harbor generating stations, so that we no longer use ocean water cooling. And we do that in a very, very tight schedule. And you'll see at the top of the page, for us, this is like changing the engine on a 747 while it's in flight. The reason being that we need all of our coastal plants to keep the transmission system sound and reliable. So we can't take a unit off to repower it. So we have to do it in a very, very phased approach such that we maintain power and repower at the same time, and we do those switchovers in a very logical way. So this schedule that you see before you is a schedule with very little float, and it has to be executed nearly perfectly. Haynes 5 and 6 is in progress right now, and then Scattergood 3 has just started with the contracting process. So number 3 is what we want to do is we want to eliminate coal from our portfolio. Navajo Generating Station, we must eliminate that by 2019, and our plan in the Integrated Resource Plan is to do that by 2015. We already have started negotiations to look for a way to divest of that by 2015, and we have also gone out and looked for replacement energy sources. Some of those energy sources, and you'll see on the next slide, will be wind, solar, geothermal, and energy efficiency, but also we've started to look for combined cycle power plants. On Intermountain Power Project is, right now we're modeled to divest in 2027. But very soon you'll be hearing a plan to where we could get off Intermountain early at the latest 2025. So that's something that we'll be modeling in the 2013 Integrated Resource Plan as those contracts come to fruition. But right now, we have a 2020 scenario, a 2023 scenario, and a 2027 scenario modeled in this Integrated Resource Plan. Now, we don't just change coal for gas. This is a fully integrated plan. It takes all the resources that we're putting in place in this integrated manner to move us off of coal. And so right now, Navajo is 477 megawatts, but the first thing that we need to do is energy efficiency. And we've modeled 10% energy efficiency moving up to cases that are upwards of 15% energy efficiency throughout the course of this integrated resource plan. So the best energy is the energy not used. The second is how do we layer in our renewables? So we have solar, wind, and geothermal as layering in. And then last, we can look at a combined cycle facility to fill in the remaining gap that is necessary. Now, we are looking at purchasing a combined cycle power plant from the market. We have found that right now the market is so long, natural gas power plants, that the price is right to step into some of those contracts, and we can do this much more cost effectively than developing a greenfield site and building a new combined cycle facility. And then on this next slide, this shows you the overall resource mix, but I'm going to point out just a couple of highlights. The first highlight is this what's called demand response. Is in this integrated resource plan, what we want to do is start working more effectively with our customers. It doesn't make sense for us to build a power plant to use that energy for 1 or 2 or 3 hours a year to keep the lights on. So we know our customer classes will be willing to work with us in some fashion to where they will participate. And so when we have situations where they can curtail their load or shift their load, we want to develop that. So we have just started the process to develop a demand response plan, which will be ready by the end of the year, which will lay out the most cost-effective demand response programs in the country, overlay that with our customer classes so we can find out what's right for the city of Los Angeles. And through that process, we will have a significant amount of our resource coming through this collaboration with customers. And the other area is you see a significant increase in energy efficiency to the point where in some of our higher cases we see actually 15% energy efficiency in the future. Okay, so that's our resource mix moving forward. And the last element of our transition, number 5, is why do we need a power reliability program? If you go to the next slide. This top graph gives you a picture of our wooden poles that support the transmission lines here in the city of Los Angeles. Los Angeles experienced tremendous growth in the 1940s and the 1950s. And so from this slide, you can actually see that our average power pole life is exceeding approximately almost 50 years. It's 48 years. Now, the average life of a power pole is 60 years. So that means we have poles that are 70 and 80 years old on our system. Now, Los Angeles is dry. We may be able to stretch that to a 70-year pole life. But right now, we're replacing poles at the rate of 2,000 poles a year, and we need to get to 5,000 poles a year. And then over the course of 20 years, we're going to get that average pole life down to 40. That means you're going to hit poles that are 70, 75 years old at the oldest. So that's what's called the Preferred Power Reliability Program. It's a technical analysis. It's something that's based on statistics, and it's something that we're promoting in the Integrated Resource Plan as core to our reliability. In addition to poles, we also have underground cables. Is that the average life of a cable should be about 70 years. And right now we're replacing cables at the rate where cables are, some of them are 300 years old. This is a picture of the insulation around a cable inside of a vault. And this last slide is about our fix-it tickets. Now, what are fix-it tickets? Fix-it tickets are where our crews go out and literally with duct tape and baling wire, they're doing a temporary fix on our power system just to keep it operating. So they create a fix-it ticket with the intention that we're going to come back and actually do a permanent fix. Now, temporary fixes are subject to reliability challenges if there's wind, rain, lightning, storms, because they're not built up to utility standards. And so our current backlog of fix-it tickets are 41,000. We'd like to get that down to 2,000. And so we're going to need to increase our permanent fixes to the point where we start whittling that down. And if we're funding at, I think we need to do, at 4,000 a year, if I read this correctly, to get our backlog just starting to get that reduced down over the next decade. So what does it cost? These 5 transformative elements, what does it cost? This is what we project in nominal dollars the cost to an average residential customer, 500 kilowatts per month, that today their average bill is about $62 to $65. And you can see the growth over time in nominal dollars to implement all the levels of the Integrated Resource Plan and where those contributions come from. So, for example, this is our basic power reliability program. This is what we're doing today. It's not where we need to be. But you factor in the purple, this is the additional amount to get to the point where we get to acceptable industry standards. You can see the energy efficiency in here, the renewable energy, and so on and so forth. Now, a customer doesn't have to pay all of that bill. Customers don't pay rates, they pay bills. And by deploying energy efficiency, a customer actually can reduce their bills and be on this dotted line right here. And the more customers that do that will benefit from energy efficiency. And we've also looked at it from a rate perspective. Is that our rates currently are just below 13 cents, and you can see each program outlined here. Is that so? The number in 2020, the contribution to rates in 2020 is 0.9 cents per kilowatt hour. The contribution in 2032 is 1 cent, and if you average it over the course of the 20 years of the Integrated Resource Plan, it's 0.8 cents. And so you can see the contribution of every single program in the Integrated Resource Plan moving forward. But the investment gets us results. We reduce our ocean water cooling by 2029 to 0. Our CO2 emissions are reduced from today's level of 14 to the future of about 8.5. And that's well below where we were just a few years ago in 1990 at 18. I just burned out the laser. The next slide shows our local air emissions. And I used to work with Mosen when I was in air quality. And you can see that these are our local Nox emissions. Our Nox emissions reduced down to 0.09 in the future, which is a minimal level of Nox emissions on our system, which is a tremendous benefit to the citizens who breathe the air. And so the Integrated Resource Plan has a series of actions that you're going to see over the next year. Some of them we've already done. For example, we've already rolled out the 100 megawatts of the feed-in tariff program, and we'll soon be talking about the additional 50 megawatts of local renewable energy. The board has already taken action on transitioning out of coal at Intermountain Power Project, and you'll be taking that up very, very soon. The council today just approved our geothermal project, which starts our pathway towards more base-loaded renewable energy. We've started our contracts for Scattergood 3 repowering. And you're going to soon see on the street an RFP for solar development at our Beacon site. You'll see some additional wind, like I mentioned, a very, very small project. You'll see some additional contracts on Intermountain, our combined cycle, and the replacement of coal in the future. So what I want to emphasize is that this is not, while it's hefty, it is not a plan that sits on a shelf. To us, this drives all of the decision-making, the priorities, and the actions that the power system's taking to transform us. So this is an action item, directive of our strategic plan to drive this transformation process. That was a very high-level overview. The full IRP is available online, and I believe all of you have an executive summary provided by your staff.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions or comments on this presentation? Mr. Kretz?
First of all, want to congratulate Ron and the department and the mayor's office and everyone involved for the commitment to move completely off of coal power. That's one of the great environmental achievements of our time. The IRP also looks great, and it's a historic retooling of the utility, the likes of which I think have not been undertaken before. One question I have is the 10% energy efficiency goal by 2020 and the 14% energy efficiency goal for the average residential customer's bill. Can you tell me how that's calculated and how many customers doing how much efficiency adds up to that goal?
Well, what we do is to calculate the energy efficiency is that we're looking at the deployment of technology that's going to reduce a customer's usage. And so it's all of the programs that add up to the 10% and then the 15%. Now, how do we get there? We get there by first looking at what's called the maximum potential study, which was done about 2 years ago, that says these are the technologies that can be deployed on an economic basis. So they make sense because they reduce the amount of fuel that you're going to need to purchase in the future. And that sets the kind of the target level. Then what happens is that we bring that back to our energy efficiency managers, and they start to deploy the actual programs. We're going to get this much from this program, this much from this program, and they have their own tactical plan on how they're going to actually deploy those programs. they've already started deploying. We understand that the direct install program is already started. There are rebate programs that have already started, and there's a whole host of other programs. But it's probably worthy of a full dialogue on all the energy efficiency programs moving forward. And if that's something that this committee would like, I'm sure we'd be happy to come back with a full outline of the programs that we foresee.
Yeah, personally, I think that would be worth it, obviously up to the chair, but I would certainly recommend that kind of an opportunity. How much of that calculation is dependent on what the department and the city and everyone involved do, and how much of that is dependent on what our customers do? How many, is there an estimate of how many customers we're anticipating participates to get to us to that number? And is it 10% or 90% or what's our rough guess?
I think we're going to need to come back and answer that question because we haven't built that level of detail in the integrated resource plan as how much was direct install by DWP and how much was done by customers, unless Aram has that number on the top of his head. So we'll come back with that when we have a more complete energy efficiency presentation.
Okay, I'm not sure whether the chair heard that request, but I would certainly recommend that we come back on an agenda that's not too full and have a more extensive discussion of how we're actually going to do the energy efficiency that's being proposed.
That's a wonderful request that I think we should do. So we'll agendize that.
Very good.
Okay.
One other question. On the power poles, we've sort of assumed over the years that there's a certain life, and we've been pushing that life, I think, beyond what one would have expected. And I don't know whether we've actually had problems as a result, or whether indeed the life of poles could be pushed further and further as we're trying to save money and use the money for other things.
Well, let me give you just a couple.
What happens when a power pole goes bad and actually causes a problem? What kind of problems do we have?
So this is an example of one of the power poles that have basically broken, and this has become a safety issue, because if a power pole actually breaks and falls on the ground, you create a significant safety problem as well as a reliability problem. And there's just a couple of additional examples. These are actual pictures of power poles on our system, and as they get older and older and they start to deteriorate, you know, me and lasers are just not friends. So that's some examples on power poles. But you can see the significant deterioration on our system in some cases.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Zine and then Mr. LaBonge.
The 70% power replacement and comply with state environmental mandates. Any assistance from the state or the federal government in the cost for this process?
There is some assistance. It's assisted through tax incentives for renewables to buy down the cost. There are some incentives with some financing and loan guarantees available. We are trying to take maximum advantage of that, which is why when we do renewables programs, we work with entities that can take advantage of the tax benefits and pass those on to us. We've applied for some of the low-interest financing at our Adelanto and Pine Tree solar facilities. So we're trying to take a maximum advantage of those programs as they are still available.
So there is assistance financially?
There is some assistance financially.
Okay. And while you're the power man, we're talking about one side of the system, and there's two sides to the system. You don't deal with the other side, but then there's additional costs. Coldwater Canyon, for example, what they're doing with the replacement. So this is one side of the equation, and then there's the other side, which is another issue, deterioration, expense, etc. Do you folks ever get together and decide how we're going to work this out, you and the power side, the water side, or is it totally separate?
It's not totally separate in the sense that water system and power system do work together on trying to achieve goals. So water system has been very helpful to the power system on making properties available so that we can hit our renewables goals. So we've looked at the dry lake to help mitigate some of the issues that they have and using renewables. So we're constantly trying to maximize each of our resources to meet our overall power and water objectives.
So there is a cooperative effort.
There is cooperative effort.
It's not that this wall here and that wall there, but you are working for the benefit of the ratepayers.
Correct.
Thank you.
Rich, you got anything you want to add?
Your projection, I think the last year I saw in there was 2039 in terms of how far you project this out. So obviously you can't anticipate what kinds of changes might come in terms of technology advancement, in terms of access to land, in terms of all kinds of factors that come into play. So how accurate is your report? I mean, how can you give us a level of confidence about the accuracy of it?
So we do that by having a strong discipline to tune this up every single year.
Okay.
So every year, so there will be a tune-up in 2013 that will look at new assumptions on gas prices and coal prices and CO2 and what's happening with the legislation. So as we tune that up, we get more and more clarity. And so from an analytical perspective and a tactical perspective, we have a very good plan out 5 years.
Okay.
So as we deploy strategies, we have to be mindful of the fact that any strategy we deploy may need to be tuned up and be robust enough to change in 10 or 15 years. An example of that would be, why would we want to own power plants? Well, we'd want to own power plants so that we have a long-term footprint so that those power plants could be repowered in 10 or 15 years, if necessary, to meet new strategic goals. So that would be an example of allowing for that flexibility to change over time.
Okay, and with regard to some major investments that will take a long time to implement, like replacing 70% of the power poles. The life expectancy of a power pole is
60 years
60 years.
nationally.
What's
might
the
be able
life
to squeeze
expectancy of underground cable?
The underground cable is about 60 years. We're trying to get to about 70 years or 80 years for underground cables.
And is there any benefit to reducing the number of poles and looking at underground cable?
There are reliability benefits, but there's challenges with that as well. There's costs, significant costs involved, significant disruption involved, and so if we're going to do that program, it needs to be very strategic in certain areas, and I believe that we do have plans for certain areas where that will happen, correct?
Okay. Also, with regard to the cost analysis, similar question to my first. We can't really predict the market forces in terms of the economics. We can guess, but how confident are we that we can transition off of coal with these targets relative to the market forces?
So specifically on coal, we've been working several years to enable the ability to transition out of Navajo by 2015. So that's why we have already shopped the market to look for replacement power. We have deployed rapidly our renewables and our energy efficiency programs to get there so that we can make that decision and make that happen by 2015. So the confidence is extremely high that can happen. Intermountain, on the other hand, is 2027. And so what we need to do is bring all the participants along with a strategy that's going to make sense for California, make sense for Utah municipal utilities, make sense for Utah, et cetera. Bring everybody along and then have the ability to transition to other sources of clean fuel technology. So the timing of that, I think that's open for discussion. It'll be by 2025. Could it be earlier? Maybe. It could be earlier. So there's less clarity as you get farther out. But it will happen by 2025.
Hindsight is 2020, right? The reliability is affected as we move away from more stable sources. It affects our reliability. So I heard you make some brief mention of reliability, but how confident are we that we could maintain our reliability, particularly in a couple of years where we've had a number of brownout situations and
I will tell you,
emergency situations?
that one issue keeps all of us awake at night, is to make sure that as we transition to these new renewables...
Not all of us. You guys.
Everybody at this table
Yeah.
stays awake at night thinking about these things.
Yeah.
But this is why it's important that as we transition off of the once-through cooling, that we do so with power plants that are quick starting, fast ramping, that we do so with control technology so that it can be more responsive to what we call variable energy resources, so solar and wind technologies. But it also means as we think about it, we need to think about not only using those technologies, but to think how we might be able to use geothermal in that mix and how we can combine wind and solar together to help reduce some of that volatility. And those are the types of things that we're trying to deploy in a very stepwise fashion. So as we built Adelanto and Pine Tree, we learn from it because it's our plant and we can fine-tune the controls. We can fine-tune the information systems. We have 4-second data, and from that, we can learn and deploy that then to larger projects moving forward. And we're doing that through all the technologies we're deploying, is trying to learn before we make major commitments.
Now, I don't think I heard anything with regard to advancing battery technology and storage capacity. Is that because the department doesn't have any confidence that we're going to see much advancement in those areas? Or I really think that if there's going to be a major breakthrough in reducing the cost, that it's going to be in storage capacity and battery development.
So the department's philosophy is to be fast followers. And so we want to follow the development of the technology, and as industry starts to push energy storage technologies, we want to watch that, and when it starts to look like it makes commercial sense and it's been proven, then we can deploy. Now, LADWP has Castaic Power Plant, which is a 1,200 megawatt battery, which really gives us the position to kind of build up a lot of our renewables and integrate those effectively.
Well, I'll leave you with this, that the scale of DWP's imprint on the economics of power is such that I think we should be investors in technology advancement, and particularly in the area of battery and storage capability, because we can drive the market just by virtue of being a huge customer. So I would encourage the department to at least study the possibility of investing in developing those technologies, just as the AQMD has invested. Because I remember I wrote one of my first bills in the legislature was for technology advancement for AQMD. Just as they have invested in technology development and advancement, I think DWP has that kind of capability. Should we choose to be a driving force, not a follower, rather than expect the market demands to emerge elsewhere, we can create those demands.
And we will clearly beef up that section of our 2013 Integrated Resource Plan. We can absolutely do that.
Thank you. It's a very good plan, by the way. Thank you.
We're going to hear from the ratepayer advocate in just a minute. Just a couple quick things. Absolutely, you have to have your track shoes on for the event of an earthquake. You were tremendous in 1994. You had that power right back up. And as you waited for the gas leaks to settle and all that, you brought the power back up. But we're going to have another earthquake. 1 minute. Where are you on preparation? How do you co-plan for that? Because every good business has a disaster plan.
Well, right now, we are updating our emergency preparedness plans on an annual basis. We also are taking our management team through desk exercises and actual putting them in scenarios where they need to respond in a real way to train our employees. So it is absolutely, reliability is a core business, and recovery from fires,
Right.
earthquake, floods is very, very important. And it's a very important part of our annual
Which you do
program.
constantly, which is real key. I also want to let you know, some years ago you thought it was the right thing to do, we'll get maybe recycled material for your vaults. DWP used to always have strong steel plates, it had DWP, DWP water, DWP power. You should see if you walk around the city, which I do, some of these vaults are swelling and they're breaking. And so, maybe it was cool to recycle plastic, but it doesn't hold up. So I want to ask you to look at that and do that. And Mr. Zine, you should be proud of DWP. DWP used to run their trucks. They used to have the oldest fleet. Yeah, you ran them till they didn't run anymore. And now you do change your fleet out, but they've always tried to do that. I remember one time I was there and there was $92 million you bought trees from Georgia for power poles. Does that sound like a price that you would buy a bunch of power poles over a multi-year contract from the state of Georgia?
We do buy them from suppliers that bring from different states.
Yeah.
We do have those multi-year contracts.
But a very expensive, but a very necessary thing. And the last thing I know this is power, but you got to keep telling the story. People don't realize it. We're just doing an upgrade on Las Feliz and Hillhurst. Your people are very committed out there, but the people don't know that our neighborhoods are older, especially in the district that I represent, and the need to upgrade facilities is constant. There will be disruption, but as we have to do that, because people get, I think, more upset when they don't have the power when they do. And in the last 365 days, have we had any major power outages, major ones? Not a major one or significant one, sometimes here or there. So I think it's important, and your PIO information is so important on that. And the last thing I wanted to ask you too, maybe with your department, see if you could deputize the weather people on all the channels so they give a message. We've got to be water-wise this year. The water pack is down. I know you're power guys, but it's very important to get an advocate for you somehow. And I never was able to do this, but I'll throw this out here right now. Invite all the weather people from all the stations to see if you can deputize them and at least get the message out, a shared message that also is simple. So, very good. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to call on the right there, after, of course, Mr. Koretz.
I just want to ask one quick follow-up question to Mr. Alarcon's. Does the DWP ever actually do its own research and development, say, to looking towards technologies that we might be using 10 or 15 years from now? Do we typically do that, or do we just piggyback on the technologies as they develop?
We do.
This Aaron Benjamin power system, we do have collaborative efforts, with universities and other institutions, to look in, the APRI being one of them, and also the universities around us. But also we have our own test lab. It's not exactly what you mentioned, Council Member, as far as advanced research, but like material research and performance research and things like that we do in-house. But the forward, looking research and stuff, we partner with other institutions.
But we do our own testing, obviously,
Yes.
with those. Great.
Thank you. And last thing, if you could, put solar on every park gymnasium, every schoolhouse, every public building, every library, to cut the cost that they have to, so they can keep more money for books and balls and other play equipment. I'm going to call on the ratepayer advocate right now, followed by, we have two cards, public comment. Excuse me?
I got one more question.
Or make it quick.
The quick question is, I noticed LA Unified in their parking lots are putting the covers with the solar. Is that power for the school, or is that power coming back to the department?
Today, that is power for the school through the solar incentive programs that we have available.
Because they seem to be doing that to a lot of their parking lots. throughout the region.
Yes, that is correct, and we do expect the schools as well as city buildings and other agencies to participate in the feed-in tariff program, where then it could be grid connected and they could benefit financially from that.
And then save us all power in the long run.
It certainly helps us with our compliance. So it's on their side of the meter, it saves us power, it saves us from having to generate from other resources. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, right now, Mr. Clerk, if I could ask you right now, we're going into this next phase here where we're going to hear from the department in a quick PowerPoint and then the view of the ratepayer advocate. Okay, so here we go. Mr. Benjamin.
I brought item number 3, relative to...
Item 3, we're doing 2 or 3 together.
We'll just go quickly on the summary of the items.
Yes, right. Yeah, something. I would name it all.
I'm Phil Leiber. Mr. Benjamin and I will be presenting a brief overview of the department's follow-up items in connection with council-adopted recommendations that came out from our last rate request. The presentation you just heard gave the major reasons why DWP power rates will be increasing in the years ahead. And we're going to be doing everything we can to keep those increases within a manageable range and to mitigate them to the extent possible. So we welcome the recommendations the council adopted in connection with that last rate request. Those 10 recommendations are summarized here. We do have a presentation on each of these, but in the interest of time, we could just address any questions that you had on these. The 10 follow-up items, many of them have the ability to impact DWP costs to some degree or another. Certain of the recommendations relate to just how those costs are allocated between customers, and certain recommendations were in interest of improving transparency by providing additional information. The extent to which any of these recommendations would have a measurable impact on rates depends on the portion of the overall budget that such costs represent, the availability of any lower cost alternatives, and our ability to use such lower cost alternatives. And I can go quickly through these recommendations. You're welcome to stop us along the way and ask any questions. The first recommendation relates to DWP labor costs and the potential for greater flexibility to contract out effectively, as well as bring salaries and benefits closer to other power utility providers. I would like to begin by noting that labor costs for DWP, in contrast with other city departments, are only a small fraction of the overall budget. So accordingly, any changes, even some of the more significant hypothetical changes the RPA modeled for his purposes, tend to have a modest impact on rates. That said, provisions related to labor costs and practices are specified in labor agreements we have with the various associations that represent DWP employees. Most DWP employees are represented by the IBEW, and that contract expires at the end of September 2014. Between now and the expiration of this contract, a range of matters related to the contract will be discussed with labor representatives, and the DWP will communicate with the Executive Employee Relations Committee in connection with those discussions. The next recommendation didn't affect the level of cost overall, but how those costs could potentially be charged to customers. The recently adopted power rate ordinance modified the existing rate structure by applying a surcharge to rates that were in effect previously. We do anticipate the need for additional rate adjustments in 14-15 forward, and we would need to update that rate ordinance at that time. We also intend to conduct a cost of service study to determine the allocation of costs within and potentially between customer classes. And as a result, we may, if conditions warrant, change that approach of having 2 rate ordinances that specify our rates. We'll be working closely with the City Attorney's Office to determine if legal conditions would permit that simplification effort, which we do support.
There's another recommendation that doesn't relate to DWP costs overall, but again, how those costs are charged to customers. We did develop earlier this year an RFP to help us retain a consultant that we would use to examine a number of rate issues, including rate design matters, and the update of a marginal cost study for both water and power. We expect to award that contract in May, and at that time, over the next several months, we'll be working to develop alternatives, seek input from key customers, and we will work closely with the RPA as those studies evolve.
The next item was referring to the benchmarking for our repowering. The next several years, we're going to be spending close between $2 to $3 billion on repowering power plants, and the recommendations was to find a way for us to benchmark to find out that the costs associated with those repowerings are in line with the industry standard. So we have certain checks and balances that we currently have in place, which is our internal estimates. We have a third-party review for our costs. We have a competitive bidding process, and we also have a comparison between what we do versus what the industry does. And just to give you an example, because this is the latest information on the Scattergood power plant that we put out for bid, is that the gas turbine world handbook, which is the industry standard for the unit cost of these units that we have acquired, is for a simple cycle units, the published cost was $72 million. Our bids came out to be about $75 million. Our combined cycle units published cost was $81 million. Our bids came out at $86 million, and the balance of plant was $200 as an average. The bids came out to $222 million. What's worth mentioning is, I think Mike Webster mentioned the issue that we have is that we are taking units offline in an existing power plant, and that is much more complicated operations because we have to keep the plant running as we install new units and then rejoin the control systems and operations as we get these repowering done. So the delta that you see in the cost of those published numbers versus the bid prices are because of that complications that we're going through. The power reliability funds that we have, we've mentioned the poles and wires and a lot of the infrastructure that we have going on right now. We have hundreds of millions of dollars that we invest every year to make sure we're catching up on the curve of replacement here. But we do have, alongside with the programs, we do have several studies that have basically set the goals for us to, for replacement cycles, which is ongoing, but we're not stopping at those studies that prioritize our infrastructure replacement, gives us the guidelines of what the industry standards are. We do have efforts right now to put an RFP out to make sure we have a third party come in, review our programs, and also give us some course adjustments as we lay out the next 5 to 10 year plan for us to make sure that we're on the right track on the reliability. The bottom line on this issue is that we do want to make sure that the reliability numbers go the right way and we get more reliability and more dependable system. This item talks about the staffing, the internal staffing versus contracting out. The majority of the combination of our in-house versus contract does by business case to make sure that we are bringing the right resources, the expertise. For example, the repowering are almost 100% contracted out because of the units that we buy and also the installation that are unique for these repowering projects that we don't have in-house. Those are all contracted out, including the Castaic repowering and some of the transmission line that we do. But we do marry the two models together with using our in-house forces to make sure our system is prepared properly, and then the contractors that come in can be integrated and that system can be reliable to make sure that the operations are not compromised.
This recommendation relates to DWP's use of overtime. We are pleased to report that the trend on overtime has been declining. It's declined fairly significantly over the past 3 years. In terms of the power system, in 2008, 2009, it was as high as about 26%, and in the most recent fiscal year, it declined to just under 18%. The same trend has continued in the water system and the joint system as well. Use of overtime is driven by operational factors as well as provisions in the memorandums of understanding. In both the water system and the power system, the two main drivers are emergency response and restoration of outages. And to some extent, there's very little you can do on that. You need to respond to those emergencies to get restoration of service as quickly as possible. But in both cases, in the water system, it's run about 50% of overtime. In the power system, it's been about 15%. We do have the ability to overtime requirements, as I said, are mainly driven by operational requirements. The MOUs also govern overtime. To the extent we want to outsource, the labor agreements do require that we offer up to 10% overtime to the affected divisions. But overtime, we think, is well under control, and we'll continue to keep an eye on it.
Here's a question, Mr. Zine.
I had a question on the overtime. A couple nights ago, driving down Ventura Boulevard at midnight, they had a number of water crews out. Do you have crews 24 hours a day that are on duty, or do they have to call them in after hours when they have a power or a water situation that takes place?
We have almost similar models between water and power. We have the maximum number of crews are during the working hours, and then we have
daytime hours.
Daytime hours, and then we have basic crews that are roaming in the city. You know, we have different districts that we have crews situated in different parts of the city, and those are on continuous shifts. So we have operations that are continuous shifts. We have crews that are available for responses, and we have to call in other crews. We have capacity to call in.
So if it's a situation so you have on-duty crews 24 hours a day. So a situation that the on-duty crew can handle, they would handle if they need additional resources, and they call people.
Call in.
Okay. Thank you.
The next recommendation relates to our hedging program. Given our increased reliance on natural gas, it will be important that the department is taking appropriate steps to manage our exposure to potentially volatile gas prices. There is a hedging policy currently in place that allows us to hedge up to 75% of our gas needs. Presently, our gas needs are hedged 58% in the subsequent fiscal year, and that declines down to 14% when we get all the way out to 21 and 22. Currently, 3 tools are available to DWP to hedge our exposure, and all 3 are presently used. About 21% of next year's gas needs are covered by DWP-owned gas fields. About 25% is procured through physical gas purchase contracts, and 12% is covered with financial contracts. It is appropriate for us to review our hedging program periodically. Several events have led us to conclude that a thorough review at this time is appropriate. These drivers include this recommendation, a recently issued city controller's audit, some work that DWP retained consultants have done, and potential changes in the availability and type of hedging tools available. Another major driver is rate structure changes now versus when the hedging program was originally adopted over 10 years ago. So as a result of that, we are working to retain a consultant to assist us in updating the hedging program, including the objectives, hedging choices, reporting, controls, and other aspects.
This is Councilmember Koretz. Your question is addressing the energy efficiency and your questions about what the plans are. So basically, the no regrets actions that we're taking right now, like for direct install on small businesses, as we mentioned, the crews are on the ground right now. We have qualified contractors that the department has hired that are going to start going door to door and looking at the small businesses to make sure that we make an assessment on replacement of lighting and anything that we can do, subsidize that cost, and actually do the installation. These are contract crews that are going to be going around. We also have our own crews that are going to be doing our buildings and other municipal buildings. That's going to be the program that's ongoing, but basically for the strategic look at what we can do the next 2 years versus the next 10 years or 15 years, there are studies underway right now to do the potential study to kind of prioritize on the cost benefits of each of those programs, and that's going to answer a lot of the questions you have, because we couldn't answer them because we don't know exactly the best source for achieving those goals. We kind of put an overarching goal of 10%, 15%, but exactly how the segments underneath those programs are going to be addressed, these are going to be the studies that we're going to address those with.
And so those are goals, but in theory, once you've done these studies, you could find that you
we
do
have to
much better
shift.
than the numbers
Right.
that you're looking at.
But we are doing no regrets thing. The home efficiency education, the CFLs and the LEDs and the water conservations and all those things that we would do, no matter what the study says, those are good things to do and they're the right things to do. Those we're going to go forward and do those. But we might find out, for example, commercial industrial buildings that needs a little bit more engineering and technical analysis on efficiencies on their air conditionings and other systems. Those might be a little bit more complicated, but this study is going to identify all those customer segments that will benefit from these programs, and that's what we will direct the dollars to go after those units.
Very good.
The next recommendation relates to process improvements within the department, and this will be a major focus area for us in the years ahead. You'll see this commitment documented in our soon-to-be-released strategic plan. We're going to get this done across the utility, and to drive it forward, we plan to establish a small group within DWP that would be responsible for promoting, monitoring, and reporting on these efforts. We would like to note that this is not something new for us. We have a number of efforts that have been accomplished in recent years, several that are currently underway, and numerous things that we have planned for the years ahead. Just some of those are shown in this table, and in the formal document that we submitted to the council, we listed many such initiatives that are underway.
This item recommended a semi-annual report to the mayor and the council on the status of the RPS and how we're doing on those. So currently what we have is a monthly report that we give to our board, basically giving a status on what has changed since the month before, and gives us a very concrete schedule and implementation plan looking forward from that. That's one avenue that we use. We also use the quarterly reports for RPS for the rate recovery reports that identifies, what's installed and what's in service and how we're recovering the cost. We're also going to review any other reports that we could do to facilitate, the communications of what we've done and what our plans are. And of course, the IRP, as you saw, does an annual review of our goals because we have a mandated percentage implementation plan and how we're achieving those percent by the law and the plans to trigger those.
So we don't see these recommendations in isolation, but as part of a continuous improvement cycle for the department. Each rate case we expect will generate new recommendations, and we will work on incorporating changes from the previous recommendations into our operations. We will plan to report on our progress on the recommendations issued from the last cycle in the months ahead, and we expect to receive continuing feedback from the RPA as these projects are brought to our board and in some cases the council, and when we go forward with the subsequent rate case in 2014, no doubt there'll be additional recommendations that we'll be reporting on. So this is a continuous improvement cycle that we foresee we're entering into. To kind of conclude, we are committed to continuing to improve how we deliver service to our customers, and these are reflected really in our mission statement. And to achieve the aspirations of our mission statement, we recognize we do have work to do in a variety of areas. Our commitment towards increased environmental responsibility is well known and has been discussed in the previous presentation, and the power system includes the entire power supply replacement program towards that end. Our need to communicate better and improve responsiveness to customers is also a major focus in the years ahead. Our new customer care and billing system scheduled for implementation later this year will help us move in that direction. I should also note that our mission statement does include the word efficient, And as we continue to foresee the need for rate adjustments in both water and power, we are doing what we can to reduce those rate increases through improving efficiency across the utility. And that will include working on the recommendations adopted by the council and in numerous other ways.
Thank you. Now, I was out of the room. Dr. Pickle, did you?
No, he didn't, so it's his turn.
Okay.
And then we have 2 cards.
Okay. We have some questions or comments as well.
My comments can be summarized in 3 words. Ready, aim, fire. Right now, these steps lay out the plans for getting ready for evaluating a transformation process that DWP is in the middle of. We're further along in some components than in others. It's important that we get results back appropriate to the decisions being made and the time they're being made. We have major actions expected over the next year to year and a half on rates, on contracts for power projects and independent power, and on the next round of labor negotiations. We also have policy actions that will affect this, and it's important that we use information from these processes to inform those decisions. So that's the key thing I have to say on this.
Give me a translation, ready, aim, fire.
This is getting ready.
Okay.
They've laid out the plan, they're contracting for help, they have information in some areas, like the very positive news on the benchmarking of the scatter good. I'm relieved to hear, in spite of that complex site, your costs are so close to the gas turbine world averages. In other cases, we don't have the information yet on benchmarking various overall costs of labor, including pension plans and such. We need that so the council and EERC and this board and the DWP board are informed as we move ahead with those decisions. So before we make the decision, fire the shot, we need that in place. And then
Basically, it's incomplete. It's like, let me do this, because that sounds like I'm standing against a wall. You're at the LAX, you got through, you checked your bags, but you haven't gone through TSA yet. Still got to get TSA, and then you got to go to the gate, get on the plane. So we got like 2 more steps, you're saying?
Right.
Okay,
Before we're ready to fly with the decisions,
got it.
we have additional steps for many of these components. And then I have one additional component on the tieback between these and the IRP comments. One of the most important charts in the IRP was showing the rate impacts of the individual policy choices. And the efficiency measures on everything from the effect of costs on the base rate component, plus each of these other components is important to understand the rate impact from our customers so our decisions are informed. DWP should be complimented for getting this amount of detail on the table. A number of the investor-owned utilities in California have not put this level of detailed information on the cost impacts of the decisions out in this explicit format. Congratulations for DWP for laying it out this well.
Thank you very much. And do we have any questions or comments from committee members?
No, but let me ask you a question. So if you're at the gate, you're not even your TSA, what are you going to do about it? How am I going to get on my plane? I'm interested in seeing them complete their task of serving the public through power and water, reliable power. So what do they need to do?
In some cases, your flight may be delayed.
Okay,
In some cases, you're not ready to fly.
all right. What about the people, though? I don't want to see them without power. I'm more interested in people who are upset when the power goes out than anything else, because it's been such a consistent service of reliable energy. So I just want to make sure, how do we expedite it? How do we make sure you catch your flight?
One is the industry is pushing to the edge of current technology by going to 33% renewables. Going beyond that as we get to that level and more, we're more and more operating out of the edge of the engineering experience. And the power system that DWP operates in is really a single machine from Baja to northern Alberta. It's a single wire. And things that other people can do can affect us. We saw that in 2000, 2001. We're doing major changes to meet environmental goals, but at the same time, it has to be done in ways that we understand the technology steps we're taking. So reliability is the first goal. As we all know, when you don't have power, it's much more expensive than
But you're the big guy standing there at TSA looking at me, if I'm DWP, and you say, I ain't going to let you go through here, because you're the ratepayer advocate, right? So how do we find a way to achieve these goals that you've been assigned? Yeah, I'm worried about it, because I hear the report, everybody's report, very thoughtful, and then you're very thoughtful.
One, what DWP is laying out is correct. It's in line with what's done.
So that's good.
It's in place, but there are more steps involved in this process. There's more information. We're still searching for the information.
Your office is.
And DWP. A lot of these actions are only information DWP can generate in its own business.
But in the next year, we could move forward.
Yeah, if I may, the process that we put in place because of those questions that Mr. Fred Pickle puts out there, our IRP looks at what we've done, evaluates the results of what we've done. We do have course correction for the next 30 years. And we put out options in front of us to make sure that we're not missing any of those. We might take a bus instead of flying.
Okay.
We might not need to go there. But as we know the information that we have, the rules that we have in front of us, we must make those plans. We're going to keep the lights on no matter what.
Got it.
And those are the things that we will put in front of you.
An example is divestiture of Navajo versus changing things at Intermountain Power. With Navajo, we're fairly close to decision. We have a fairly narrow set of things we can do. With Intermountain Power, we have until perhaps 2020 before we have to make all the major decisions.
The hard decision.
Well, there will be decisions before then, but there are a lot of decisions that will have to occur over the next 6 to 7 years.
Yeah, well, we are paving the way to make the decision because without those steps, we cannot make this decision in 2020. So everything we're doing is to give us the flexibility to make those decisions.
I like the word flexibility.
Got it. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. We have two public speakers on this item. Thank you for your presentations. William Shennerweck and Jack Comfortville. You can both come up to the table and...
I'm William Shennerweck, and I'm a nuclear engineer, and I'm telling you to keep the coal plant. I've been following this stuff for years, and I have a very bad feeling about it. And the more I see, the worse I feel. And the latest Power magazine indicates that the reliability of wind energy may be half of what you expect. And if the wind stuff doesn't work, then you're going to end up running all your backup combustion turbines, which are only supposed to run part of the time, are going to end up running all the time, and you're actually going to end up worse than having kept the coal plant.
Thank you.
Everything else I wrote on the thing I handed out.
Great. Thank you very much. Jack Comfortville?
My name is Jack Comfortville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. I think the DWP has made great strides in transparency, starting off with the PA consulting report about the energy cost adjustment factor in 2010, the 78% of the people that voted for the ratepayers advocate, which was instituted a year later, and also the PA consulting report back in August with regards to the DWP power increase. However, what I've heard today is I think we're looking more at the trees than at the forest. I don't see any real numbers here as to what the ratepayers could save overall. There's been no real investigation, overall investigation of what I call the IBE labor premium, which had been estimated by DW people in the past to be about $250 million a year. We haven't had any discussion about the 40% salary premium or the rich benefits, or nothing about the pension plan, which has about a $2.3 billion shortfall, which is really more than $4 billion when you get down to when you use realistic rates of return. We haven't had any discussions about the work rules. We really haven't had any discussion about benchmarking of DWP's operation. Yes, we saw something about the powering systems, but not on the labor costs and how much it costs. Now, people will say that labor is only 25-30% of the total bill, but of the value added, that's the revenues minus the cost of power or fuel, it's a significantly larger portion. We also haven't heard anything about Prop 26 and whether the DWP transfer fee is actually legal. I think the final thing is I think having the labor negotiations in the EERC is the wrong answer. It's not transparent. Nobody knows what's going on. It's a backroom deal, and especially it's a backroom deal when you consider all the money that the IBEW is spreading forth in the city in their political campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I just ask the CLA to take whatever his note is? You have a little letter, and we'll look at some of those questions you have. I know there's some things that we do, not behind doors, but in a closed executive session to discuss city issues, and there's a reason for that. But if you would want to make it in some form of an email, I'll certainly look into that.
I'll send you a note. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I got a question for
Mr. Zine?
Dr. Pickle, if you can come back, please, and also the water and power. Regarding the goal to remove that coal operation, do we have any liability with that when we remove ourselves from that? Do we have any contractual agreements that will cost us liability?
So we have two types of, we have two power plants. One of them is ownership, which is the Navajo coming up. So as part of our structure that we have, we will make sure that any liability we have, whether it's reclamation or employee costs or anything to operate that plant, we've been there for over 35 years, that will be part of that, the numbers that we will end up.
So I'm thinking of Mono Lake. We've been spending billions of dollars, if I'm not mistaken, it's Mono Lake, where we have that.
The dry lake.
Well, it's Department of Water and Power, but the fact is, we've been paying billions of dollars to try and do dust mitigation in a situation, and I'm looking at the coal plants, which do we then incur liability, which will then cost us additional dollars?
We don't have any parallel to that. We do have a certain cleanup cost and stuff that would be part of our operations. On the IPP side, we're power purchaser. State of Utah owns that. The entire liability is on the owner.
On Utah. Yeah. So there's no liability that's going to come after the fact.
No.
Once we remove ourselves from that. And then as far as the operations at those two sites, will it then go to another state, another jurisdiction, where they'll then tap in and utilize that power that we're using, the coal?
So
are they going to shut it down? Are they going to shut it down, or is it going to be used by another entity? Outside the city of LA?
We are only talking about our share, and we will stop taking energy from that source. What happens after that, it's kind of question mark. There's a lot of plans in place to extend, do any of those. The operator of those plants, it's not DWP.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying, so in other words, we don't take it. Does somebody else take it? Are there any federal regulations requiring that they start shutting those down, or is this just something that we're doing out here on this particular region?
Yeah, we're not taking our plants anywhere outside the date that we get out of there. Then they could resell it to other people. They could take the shares and split them across other utilities. They could. Those plans are still question marks.
So the plants probably will stay in operation. Just someone else will use that coal for power. Versus shut it down and eliminate it.
Yeah, IPP, not the coal, is going to be basically at the end of our contract, we will be switching over to other sources. But Navajo, it could be other users in there.
So in other words, the plant will still be in operation, the pollution, whatever the case may be, it just won't be, we're not responsible for it, somebody else will then be.
Right.
So the federal government hasn't come in and said, knock it off.
Right, it's still developing.
It's still developing on the process, okay.
But as far as our plans goes, we've already declared, for 3 years we've been declaring December 2015 we're going to get out, and that's still our plan.
And then we're not going to be incurring additional liabilities on that site?
It'll be wrapped up.
Okay, all right, Thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you very much. There were certainly some items that were presented in today's presentation that require us to go more in depth. Some were brought up by Mr. Correx, for example, on the energy efficiency, some by our public comments, but we will take those items up individually at a later time and just go more in depth into them. I, for example, am interested in tracking our capital debt. I've been the chair of this committee. I know we've been talking a lot about infrastructure and building, and from large requirements that we have to our neighborhood-based infrastructure that we're rebuilding. I want to see how we're tracking the capital investments that we're making. So we have a number of these items, given this broad overview and this broad presentation, that we will take individually. So we'll bring those at a later time. But thank you for your presentations. And Dr. Pickle, one final thing. Do you believe that the books are being made available to you and the transparency is being made available to you as we had hoped and wished?
Yes. DWP has been very forthcoming on the information I've requested.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next item.
Mr. Chair, note and file.
Note and file these reports, yes. Thank you.
Number 4, motion Englander, Huizar, and DWP to report relative to the status of the plan for expeditious institution of livestock hardship adjustment for the water rate ordinance.
We have staff to report on this item, please.
Phil Leiber, Department of Water and Power. So we are supportive of making a change of this nature. The only question is the timing. Our preference would be to put this potential change in with the other water system rate restructuring issues that we're going to be looking at this summer for implementation likely next summer, so July 2014. And while this would appear to be a relatively minor change, there are a number of impediments to making it quickly and cost effectively. And the primary impediment is this would require a change to the ordinance, and any change to the water ordinance would require a Prop 218 notification period and the costs involved in that. And so when we do a cost benefit, while the benefit to customers of this change, we understand there's about 1,500 horses in the city of LA, and the subsidy that we would be thinking of proposing here would be perhaps on the order of $2 per horse per month. So we're talking about maybe $3,000 of benefit, while the cost of making this change would be well over $200,000. So we don't see that the benefit of making this change right now on an expedited basis outweighs the cost that would be involved. So our thought is we should roll this into the other water system changes that we're going to be studying this summer and make those changes on a more timely basis next year.
Okay, and so let me make this clear. So we do it during your restructuring process, we will not incur the Prop 218 $200,000 cost.
We wouldn't incur another Prop 218 cost. Yeah,
okay.
We're going to have a 218 notification and mailing.
But that's for the whole.
As for the whole, but if we did this on a separate track, we'd have another one of those costs that we'd have to do a mailing to all the customers and so on.
Questions, comments? We have three speakers.
I met with some horse owners just a couple of days ago, requesting that they register their horses with the City of Los Angeles and the $14 fee. Many of them said they have the horses. They admitted that. They don't register them. Apparently the city permits a certain amount of land per horse. Some of them exceed that, which is one of the issues that concern. The other was the Bureau of Sanitation. They have the brown container. There's an additional fee for the brown container. So there's some concern when you talk about 1,500 horses. The numbers may be much higher than that, where people aren't registering for a variety of reasons, cost impact, et cetera. And then the other question they brought up was many of the areas of the city which are equestrian, some of those areas are being converted to single-family residence because there's no horse in that area. Then there's a concern that those equestrian areas that are zoned for equestrian are being rezoned. So I said what you folks need to do, obviously, is get your horses registered and follow the rule. So there's a detriment to the horse community in that, and this was basically up in the Sylmar area, where a lot of those folks say they have horses, they're not registering, the zones are changing, they're losing the equestrian area. So I think there's a larger situation here regarding sanitation, the brown container, for the horses, as well as when you're talking about the water rate and how much water each horse can take, 500 gallons a day. So there's other factors that maybe needs to be ironed out. It's not just the one issue of the water, but there's also other associated issues. And talking to these folks who are horse owners, apparently there's a whole lot more horses than we have a count of in the city of Los Angeles. I know Chatsworth has some, I have some in my district, but I think that the registration is one of the issues. The consequences of that is they don't register them, we don't know they're there. The person doesn't have a horse, next person next door has a horse, all of a sudden that land is rezoned, and now they're losing the equestrian area. So I think maybe animal services and planning all in association with this issue when we talk about give them a reduced rate for the water for the horses. So I just learned that a couple of days ago. I didn't know it was the number of horses that aren't registered and the issue upon the land issue. I know that we have a representative here from Mr. Englander's office, Chatsworth. They have a lot of horses in that area. How many are registered, how many of them aren't, but this obviously would affect a broader section of Los Angeles. So maybe the departments somehow need to get together, because it's affecting more than just the rate of water. It's affecting other factors. So do you know how many you have in the 12th district? And okay, so you mentioned 50. That's the 12th district, that they have other areas of the city that have horses. So I just think it's a broader thing. If we're going to do something, we need to look at the whole picture and not just the issue of the water rate, but the other factors involved. In addition to sanitation with the brown containers, because I think they said it's $65 a month for a brown container. A lot of them don't want to pay that $65, so they don't register it. They don't get the brown container, and it just seems to go down that path. And then the result is the properties are now getting rezoned, where they will no longer have equestrian areas, which they want to keep equestrian areas. So it all connects once we bring it to that issue. But the water issue is what obviously you're involved with. But I think if we look at that, we have to look at the broader focus there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember, certainly with respect to the water issue, which we do intend to look at, we would invite any feedback or information customers would like to provide us on those needs. We want to make sure that we do develop a proposal that's thoughtful and actually meets their needs.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking about 500 gallons per horse per day, 500 gallons per month, 15 gallons of water, 15 gallons of water a day per horse, 500 per month, which would be at a reduced rate. But if we've got 1,500 in Chatsworth, then I'm sure if you start adding up all over the city, we may have a whole lot more that we have to deal with.
So when you say that we could start looking at the restructuring this summer, what month are you talking about?
Well, I mentioned in my earlier presentation that we put out an RFP to bring on a rate consultant to assist us in this process. So we have received a number of proposals from those consultants, and we're trying to move as quickly as we can to make that formal selection. We expect to bring that to our board in May and get that person on board as quickly as possible to begin looking at these and all the other issues that are in front of us.
A couple of months from now.
Not more than a couple of months from now.
Thank you. We have a couple of speakers. Thank you. We could probably just remain up here just in case there's any questions we have. Charlotte Brody. After Charlotte Brody is Mary Kaufman.
Good morning, Honorable Councilman Jose Huizar and committee members. I have questions. If a planned water rate change has been talked about since 2009, how can we call this plan an expeditious institution of the livestock hardship adjustment for the water rate ordinance to provide relief to the livestock owners if it isn't anticipated into the year 2014-15? This means another year of high prices for all the livestock kept in backyards. How much concern is the government showing when it takes so long to implement something good that would provide relief for the community? Personally, I have many friends that are able to look out their windows and see their animals just outside. It gives them an awesome feeling of love and pride. For me, I love having my horse in my friend's backyard for the more personal attention he gets compared with what he would get at a boarding stable. Water is a need for every living thing. Horses require a lot. They can drink several gallons at one time when they're working. Water rates are a critical part of the price of boarding a horse. Half my board bill is for water alone. Because the price of feed went up when gas prices rose, along with the high cost of water, many horse owners, backyard owners or boarders, have been forced to give up their passion and sell their animals. For me personally, the cost of boarding is almost the tipping point. Unlike having a boat, you can't put a horse in a garage and store it until it comes, and store it until better times come along. You still have to feed, water, and clean up after them daily. While the plan to reduce water rates is good, what sensible reason is there to continue this hardship on livestock owners another year? I urge you to help save the existing equestrian communities within the city of LA by lowering the water rates for backyard livestock owners sooner rather than later.
Thank you.
I've got one question, ma'am. Do you have the dual meter for the horses? The dual meter where it comes to the Department of Water and Power, sub-meter?
Where I board, they do.
They do have the sub-meter?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Kaufman?
Good afternoon, and thank you for your time in addressing this issue. I'm Mary Kaufman. I'm an elected stakeholder member of the Chatsworth Neighborhood Council. I chair their equestrian committee. I am Councilman Englander's appointee to the LA Equine Advisory Committee. We're aware that there is a great disparity in the numbers between the licensed horses and the total equine population within the city of Los Angeles. And there have been a lot of reasons why people have not wanted to get their horses licensed. As an incentive to them to be able to try and get them more horses licensed, we want to be able to offer them with regards to the discounted rate for water for horses kept on people's property. I personally have 5 horses in my backyard, 4 of which are mine. So it's a very important issue. It was something that was promised to us back in 2009. It got taken away. Councilman Englander is asking for it again to be done on an expeditious basis. We understand economics very well, and I understand that if it's going to cost $200,000 for a mailer to be able to go out and get everything in compliance, it's not going to happen. But there are a lot of people that this will be a turning point for them on whether or not they're going to be able to keep their horses. So I would hope that it would be considered. They're saying in 2014, I'm hoping that it's not going to be taken away at that point. We've been waiting for 4 years now.
Who promised it to you in 2009?
DWP had said that they were going to go ahead and put it through. There was a letter that they wrote on notice of proposed water ordinance modifications for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, written August 2009. In there, it talks about the livestock allocation and being changed for the owners.
Thank you.
I got a couple of questions. That came from Water and Power?
Yes.
Regarding the number of horses and livestock, do the zones permit a certain number of horses and livestock per lot, acreage, etc.?
I believe it's based on how many, it's 4,000 square foot per horse on RA lots and on the K lots.
Now, what about other livestock?
It doesn't mention other livestock, so people that have 4-H'ers or FFA people that they're raising a steer for competition, they're not even considered in this, and they should be.
I think what it says here, the summary, it talks about horses and livestock owners, so I don't know what livestock they're referring to, if other livestock, if someone can explain that, or if it's just restricted to horses.
I would hope that it would include all of them.
then there's the verification whether, how much they have. Because what I learned from the folks that I spoke to a couple of days ago is that you can have a certain number per acreage. But I don't know if that's just horse or cows or goats or sheep or...
I believe the restriction is on the horses, and it's 4,000 square foot per horse. So then it depends on how much your total lot size is as to how many horses you can have there.
Yeah, can you define that livestock? Is that other animals?
Our understanding, it would be broader than just horses. We sometimes just kind of refer to it related to horses, but it would be defined in such a way to be broader.
So it would be other livestock?
We believe it would be, yes.
Horses and other livestock?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I should just note one other thing with respect to the timing. It is true this is something that the department has been ready to implement for some time. We actually had this as part of our proposed water rate change that we submitted to the RPA last summer. That change would have gone into effect July 2013, and you may recall that was deferred for a couple of reasons. Number one, when we reviewed our financial numbers, we found we really didn't need the rate increase that early. We got some lower cost financing that allowed us to defer it another year. And the other aspect of it was there were some proposed rate design changes in there that the RPA would have desired some additional time to study. So the whole package was withdrawn, and unfortunately including the livestock adjustment.
Yeah. So the status now? It's been withdrawn. What's the status now?
The status now is we would propose to include the livestock adjustment as well as the other rate design issues we're going to take a look at this summer, and all of that would go in the next proposed rate design, rate change that we would submit to the RPA later this calendar year for effectiveness next July.
So July of 2014?
2014.
Okay, and while you do that, if you can also check with those other entities I mentioned to make sure animal services and also planning, so we can get a total numbers for inclusion. Thank you.
Nicole Bertson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honorable committee members, I'm Nicole Burnson on behalf of Councilmember Englander. You did have a little bit of the history of this proposal today. This was originally introduced by former Councilman Smith and was brought forth as part of a 2009 rate restructuring. It was pulled back at the last minute by then DWP Chair Freeman, and has been sort of on hold ever since. So we thank the DWP for bringing it forward as part of this current rate restructuring. Obviously, we would like to have seen it in an expedited fashion. If it's not something that can be expedited due to the noticing costs and issues, we would at least like the department to help with a robust notification, so that if there are people who would fall into the benefit category, people who do have livestock over 500 pounds, that they would know that there would be a requirement for licensing, et cetera, so that they could get in line to receive the benefit in 2014.
Thank you. And so, working in conjunction with your office, I think it would be suitable at this time to work with DWP and go through the process they have in place to start that restructuring in a couple of months, and then go through that process. Because even if we take this as a separate process, it's going to take just as long, correct? Or
Nearly as long. I have a calendar that lays out all this process. If we were to start now, the earliest it could be done would be like November of this year. So really not that much of a benefit from the additional cost.
The additional 200, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll do that, but I think it's a prudent request from the council office that we do that outreach. If DWP could assist and come up with a plan and work with the council office to come up with a plan on how do you reach out to those that will qualify for this. I think that's the request of the office. And so, any other questions or comments? I guess if we could recommend that if we hope to go with the restructuring process, I'm not sure we should continue this item until you bring that to us, the full report. When would that come to committee? A month, 2 months?
It would be quite some time. So we're going to be looking at those issues this summer, developing a full formal proposal that would go to the ratepayer advocate.
Okay, let me do this then. Let us continue this item 60 days, and at the same time, you will provide for us an update on where you are with the restructuring. You say you're going to get a consultant in a couple of months, and we want to make sure that we stick to the timeline, so we'll make sure we're implementing this at that time.
We're happy to provide that update.
So we'll continue this for 60 days, and it's our way of keeping track of the timeline that's been proposed by the DWP verbally here today. Okay,
Thank you.
sure, thanks. All right, next item.
Item number 5, DWP and CAO report relative to the issuance of up to a maximum of 480 million power system revenue bonds, balance of capital improvements.
Thank you. This is our final item.
Yes.
Okay.
So Phil Leiber again from the Department of Water and Power. We are respectfully requesting your authorization to allow us to proceed with the issuance of up to $480 million of bonds for our power system. This will provide an important component of the funding for our capital program during the current fiscal year. The type of programs that you saw in the previous presentation regarding the evolution of our power system in terms of the sources of power and addressing the aging infrastructure needs are a major driver of the $1.4 billion capital budget. Of that capital budget, only a small portion is actually collected from customers in the current year. The majority of it, about $1.1 billion, comes from borrowing. It's appropriate to borrow for these expenditures because they do result in assets that have a long lifetime. We came to this committee late last year for authorization for $650 million of borrowing, and we did complete that borrowing in October. This $480 million, we're on a timeline that, assuming we receive your approval to go forward, we would issue these bonds in late May of this year, and we hope to be able to take advantage of historically low interest rates. We were very pleased with the rate we received on the last issuance. Rates will eventually go up, but we're hopeful that we can achieve a very attractive interest rate on this borrowing as well. I also note that of that $480 million issuance, we're pleased to report that the city is willing to transfer to DWP about $28 million of qualified energy conservation bonds that will allow us to meet our obligations at an even lower interest cost. And Natalie is here to answer any questions about that.
Natalie Breaux with the CAO's office. After receipt of the request for the $480 million bond program, on March 19th, the CAO's office received a request from DWP to use the remainder of the city's allocation of the qualified energy conservation bonds. This office, in conjunction with the mayor's office and DWP, supports this request. The city originally received, as part of the ARA program, $39.8 million in qualified energy conservation bonds. We used approximately $12 million, but $11.9 million of these a couple years ago to retrofit some, I believe, 52 buildings that met the 20% requirement by the ARA program, and those are presently on their way of being retrofitted. And in the meantime, this allocation is still available for us to use. We have surveyed the city departments, and at this time, the city doesn't find any departments that meet the 20% energy requirement, energy conservation requirement. So DWP came forward and requested the allocation, and the CAO's office is now recommending that this allocation be transferred to DWP, and we do have a recommendation that we can give to the clerk that basically would authorize the Department of Water and Power to use the city's remaining allocation of qualified energy conservation bonds totaling approximately $27.859 million in connection with the upcoming issuance of $480 million of the power system revenue bonds, and assume responsibility for any and all related post-issuance reporting and continuing disclosure requirements.
Okay, any questions,
I
comments?
just have a question regarding the 4 to 5% interest cost expected to range with the market as it is now? How do we come up with that number? It seems the market is way down.
Yeah, well, we wanted to be conservative because things can change relatively quickly, and when we start putting forward the documentation for these issuances, it's a good number of months away. But I can report that if we're successful as we were on the last issuance, it could be down in the 3% range.
So I would think it's closer to that than the 4 to 5, because it's looking at the bond market, it is not any great level. Any kind of investment now, you're lucky if you get 1%.
That is true.
So when we're talking 4 or 5, I think Water and Power gave some loans to some city departments at 6%, which I thought was extremely high.
Those loans have been based on our overall cost of capital, so it includes the previous interest costs as well, not just the most recent issuance.
So we're going to get the best rate that we can possibly get on those.
That's the hope.
And it should be less than 4 or 5.
We believe it will be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll move this item as amended by the CAO to use approximately $27.859 million of the remaining QECB allocation for the $480 million power system revenue. That's correct?
Yeah.
Is that the amendment?
Got it.
So we will move this item without objection as amended. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting. We have public comment, and then that would end this meeting. Adrian Martinez and Jim Smith, Leslie Van Curren.
Good afternoon. My name is Adrian Martinez, and I'm from the Natural Resources Defense Council. While the exclusive waste franchise issue is not on the agenda today, we heard several comments during the last hearing that we felt should be addressed now. So we appreciate your willingness to listen. We've heard critiques about the process of moving through an exclusive franchise from that stakeholders were not involved. The process wasn't good, and this issue is moving too fast. I'd argue that we're not moving fast enough. We have a moral and ecological imperative to address our waste issues for future generations. The process to develop this proposal has been more than ample. First, discussions on this matter started almost 3 years ago with motions from council members Huizar and Koretz. There was a subsequent hearing and a full council vote on the 5-year notice. In 2011, the Bureau of Sanitation held 8 public stakeholder meetings in places throughout the city. The Bureau is also contracted with consultants who solicited advice. These consultants talk to entities throughout the country that have different waste models. Then in February 2012, there was an 8-hour Board of Public Works hearing on this matter. Then in April of that same year, the matter went to the committee and the Ad Hoc Committee on Waste Reduction and Recycling. These committees heard many hours of testimony from waste haulers, environmental groups, and other nonprofits, including Midnight Mission, who testified at the prior hearing claiming they were not part of the process. Then it went to full council in November 2012, where there was overwhelming support. Since then, the Bureau has had 7 NOP hearings. In addition, there's a hearing tomorrow at the request of Councilmember Labange on the service zones. This does not even include all the stakeholder input that the city did. I'd venture to say that there have been more than 1,000 meetings on this matter in this building, and even if there have not been thousands, it sure feels like it. I'm a fan of public process like the rest of us. It makes decisions better. Heck, I have even sued agencies over process violations. However, I assure you that this process has been robust. I put more miles on my car, more bus trips, more bike trips to get to meetings on this matter than any other campaign. So I respectfully request that we move with a sense of urgency. We cannot let these arguments of process abuse hamper our ability to get this done quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. Jim Smith.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Jim Smith, representing Teamsters Local 396. On behalf of the thousands of men and women who sort and haul waste in the city of Los Angeles, we can say with great pride and certainty that the plan put forth by the Bureau of Sanitation will make LA a model city for waste and recycling jobs as well as diversion. But we're not there yet. We need to ensure that we create a system with meaningful standards and accountability that can actually be enforced. And we feel that the proposal for 11 service zones without mandatory subcontracting strikes the appropriate balance to accomplish that, while also ensuring a competitive marketplace for the long term. Calls for increasing the number of zones miss the need for accountability and enforcement entirely, because every time you add another service zone, the Bureau's ability to effectively and substantively enforce job standards is diminished. Please remember that we're here because haulers have never enforced standards on themselves. We look forward to tomorrow's meeting on service zones and to provide our input there as well. Please adopt the plan as proposed for 11 service zones. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie Van Curran.
Hello, I'm Leslie Van Karen Campbell, founder and principal of Sustain LA. I'm here to express our approval of the Bureau of Sanitation's plan for implementing the new waste franchise, and in particular, the designation of 11 waste service zones throughout the city. This is not an issue on the agenda today, but given that the Bureau will be hosting an open house on the proposed map tomorrow, we wanted to say our piece. Sustain LA and other environmental leaders believe fewer zones make each zone a greater asset to the haulers. The greater the asset, the greater the incentive to invest in the much-needed infrastructure we need to meet standards and diversion goals. We are troubled to hear there is talk of increasing the number of franchises. This would be a huge mistake because as you increase the number of zones, you decrease the value of the asset that is each franchise. That means less investment and less diversion. Creating a piece of business that companies will compete for aggressively is the linchpin of the exclusive model because it will catalyze investment, collaboration, and high-road competition. Any increase in the number of zones will also decrease the city's ability to ensure accountability and enforce the very standards we have all worked so hard to bring to this new system. So please approve the Bureau's plan with the recommended 11 service zones.
Thank you. Greg Good.
Good afternoon. You gentlemen love short meetings, so it's a pleasure to be here. As my compatriots acknowledged, we know this is not our issue on the floor today, but we wanted to address some of the lingering things that were discussed last week. In particular, I'd like to focus on the premise that there are victims in this transition that we've been talking about. Let's be very clear. The mom and pop operations, or even small businesses that keep being alluded to for the last 3 years, are a myth. Mom and pops can't afford to do this business. They couldn't afford to do this business in a permit system. They can't afford to do this business in an exclusive franchise system. The mom and pops do C&D, they do roll-off, or they're rogue, is the bottom line. Depending on the year, approximately 13 to 14 companies realistically do commercial and multifamily waste hauling in LA as a primary line of business. And of those, you have big companies and you have mid-sized companies. There are no small companies, no mom and pops doing regular commercial and multifamily business. Those mid-sized companies are several things. They're multi-million-dollar companies. They're all part of their own lobbying association, the LA County Disposal Association, which among other things, despite their claims of being victims in this process, has managed to afford a power broker sponsorship. I think this is kind of interesting. A power broker sponsorship for the past 7 years at the annual LA Political Roast. And they are not LA-based companies. There is a single company in the top 10 companies doing waste hauling in this city, based in the city of Los Angeles. What they are not is victims. They are Key Disposal, who just lost their permit because they owe the city almost $700,000 in back fees. They're American Reclamation, who should lose their permit because they were found guilty of 36 Cal OSHA violations by Cal OSHA, including 5 that were rendered or designated serious, which means they are subject to amputation or death. They are companies like NASA, Universal Waste, and Waste Resources, all of whom have successfully secured exclusive franchises in other LA jurisdictions. The point is this, and I'll leave you alone. The hauling community that will be impacted by this is a savvy political group. They are good actors and some are bad actors, but they are competitors and they will compete. Right now they're competing by calling themselves victims. When there's an RFP, they'll compete by participating in the RFP. We urge you to keep the number at 11. We urge you to adopt the Bureau's proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And everybody's getting up, and we haven't concluded the meeting. People are anxious to leave. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.